Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 3rd of November. Election day has arrived. We're finally here. We're seeing a nice power turnaround here from the ES, the S&P 500. The oranges dip below. We got green above red, rising DOC red, as well as steel above cyan, and shorts moving below the zero line there. The only thing missing here would be a shakeout yellow above magenta to give the final oomph push. Of course, I think we're going to see it back and forth here. It makes it very easy now because we went from the 23%, which is at 87. Now we're at the 42 for the 38%. So the markers for at least from a daily standpoint, above and below, very simple to follow. This is a little bit of a extreme move that we had from the S&P versus the NASDAQ. Didn't move quite as far, and so this is kind of a makeup effect. Plus, we've had some rotation as expectations about who's going to win would make some alterations. But ultimately, if it doesn't really matter who wins. If it's a clear decision quickly, then the market's going to rise on that news because the expectation will be significant stimulus. Now, of course, you then adjust to depending on who wins and if the Congress is uniformed, whether that stimulus is massive in one direction or if it's more muted. So, for instance, Republican Senate with Democratic president, you're going to have muted stimulus, and that's going to probably put a drag on the market, and you probably would see significant declines off of that. Whereas if you've got uniformity of one party rule, then you're going to get massive shock of, well, at least on the Democratic side of new funding. If it's from a Republican, probably going to be less so, but it's still going to be pro-business environment. So there are a lot of more upside potentials for the market other than gridlock, riots, and or an extended and delayed count that really puts into doubt. Because again, the market just doesn't like uncertainty. They don't care overall which one is it, as long as it's a clear decision and there's not going to be any uncertainty related to it. So from an NQ, you can see didn't get the same draft. Certainly don't have the same turnaround signal from a DOC or from PowerMo 2. So this is where we're going to get some incongruencies until these start to align. We could see a significant dip of orange potentially later in the day if there's a positive sign, but this is a significant lag from the NASDAQ. So you're seeing more of your cyclicals and other items, and tech not being the driving force in this move. And it'll be interesting because it'll be unique if there's a move towards Trump. I think you could see tech suffer quite a bit more because the expectation is there would be some retribution. I think would probably be the good word for it. From a euro standpoint, of course, risk off, so flight back to the euro temporarily, of course, if the U.S. election is decided quickly. I think you'd see another quick leg down of the euro because the lockdowns and everything, pretty much you're going to have just a growth shutdown for Europe from restaurants, everything else. Is going to be devastating in the second version lockdown, which makes little or no sense because you tried this back in March. Everyone thought it was about easing the load on hospitals that were full, but now hospitals are not full, but they're doing the same lockdown, hoping for a different result, thinking that just because they have a massive number of cases, only because they're testing through the roof, at least at exponential levels compared to what they were doing in March. And yes, they're seeing lots of cases, but they're not corresponding to the hospitals. I know I was just at the hospital with my daughter, and there were no cases for COVID there in the Tuscany area that she happened to be at, and others are not reporting the significance of it, but it's sort of like preemptive doom and gloom that hasn't happened, but that's not to say that other areas aren't suffering a little bit more, but it certainly isn't in the same category, and the therapies have definitely improved. So this hysteria is really, well, look at what it's done in the U.S. It's created two economies. You have red state economies and blue state economies, so there's no consistency to those whatsoever. From a gold standpoint, again, if there's certainty and there's a lack of a election result, you're going to see gold rise quickly, but if there is clear one-sided rule that is going to suggest real strong stimulus, I would see gold skyrocketing fast. But if it's more status quo, where there's going to be a fight between the Congresses and that, it's going to be hard for gold to make a play to the upside. So this was, well, let's look at which version this is, the Diokon P2. So the debate I've been having on this is when we get these orange signals that are coming off of declining power mode 2, whether or not to signal that we've got a potential turnaround developing, and then before when it makes the final turnaround. And in this particular case, we don't have on the, well, that's a good one. We can go to the algo. If I can get to it, there it is. We can edit the algo along the test, and you can go to the different dotted lines. And literally just by changing it to a 1, we can turn on the dotted line, and that will show up. And voila. So from where the signal was, you get a little bit of the drawdown, and then pretty much not too far off where we are from a price 82 versus 80 from an entry. So those are the differences between what that setup does, but you certainly don't suffer that drawdown at all from 80 to the low of 72.50. So from my standpoint, that's kind of a positive thing. So it's just been a debate as to whether or not to let you know, because from a code standpoint, I definitely want to know that that's occurred, but I also want the turnaround to be within a reasonable range of the readings to justify its move. And of course, as we start going higher, you would think, well, let me expand this one so we get a little tighter viewpoint of it. There we go, it gets it up close. So where we look for in that crossover setup that's a negative would be the steel dipping below but orange rising above. The difference being is if that's in rising long and short algo, doesn't have the same effect. So here we have the DOC spread where we flatten out, and then again you get the exact same turnaround where you have the rising long and short algo where you have the orange. It's when we get into the flat areas that tends to have more of an impact. So kind of, well, after this DOC spread, we sort of went flat for a while. Didn't really get any of those signals. And that's kind of stayed neutral pretty much throughout it. It wasn't until we were like right over here that we started to get some softness signal breakdown. The first one being right there. We were still in a slight incline, and then of course we had the full DOC spread. And once the DOC spread came in, that was enough to give it that primary decline before a brief interlude to the upside, and then just resurgence right back to that downside negative, which followed through quite nicely and has left us, well, once cyan under red, and we just continued that push right now. And of course this is the pre-election bounce that's taking place at this particular point. So some people with the money are making their move because they believe that they have the answer on the result. So that's an indication where smart money makes these moves early because they have the inside data that they get. So I always say, go with the money. As always, though, I will put any additional updates on the Skype chat. Trade well. We'll talk to you later.